Hello, guys, this is your friend, and we are back with a new fanic. And if you enjoy this fanic, then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanic like this. And now let's start the fanic.
Early morning. Naruto looked at the sea with a smile as he took a good long draught of the cool sea air. He had just been sent on a diplomatic envoy to Sea Country. He had been selected by Tsunade since she decided that it would be better for him to travel and be on the move than staying in the village all the time. Plus, since he was on the move, it would make it harder for Akatsuki to track his movements. Many people thought that such tactics was a bad idea, namely those who were afraid of Akatsuki getting their hands on Naruto. However, Tsunade was adamant on the idea of keeping Naruto on the move, and she felt that with each experience, Naruto would be able to improve his own abilities. Plus, the vacation was needed in order for him to deal with other matters, apart from finding Sasuke all over again. Naruto at first disliked the idea, but Tsunade was more than capable of convincing him to take the mission vacation. Actually, she once more used her power to convince the hyperactive teen to take the mission. And if there was one thing Naruto learned, it was to never argue with Tsunade when she was really in a bad mood. However, he didn't dislike Tsunade and considered her as family, and in a way, he didn't mind the trip. He was not alone, however, as Tsunade had assigned him a protector Anbu, but it was not Kakashi nor was it Yamato, as both of the said men were on other duties. Yamato was currently working on with gathering details on Akatsuki. Alongside Jiraiya, Kakashi was busy taking care of Asuma's old team of Shikamaru, Choji, and Ino. Sakura was currently working on making some new antidotes and also learning a few new techniques from Tsunade. Hinata was not around for today as she was busy working with Shino, Kiba and Akamaru on several details around the village until Kurenai was fully recovered from giving birth to her child, who turned out to be a boy. Everyone was busy, and here he was, riding a large liner and heading back home to Konoha. It would take several days before they made it back to Konoha, so he might as well enjoy himself even if this vacation was not what he had in mind in the first place. However, he took in the smell of food and with a grin, made his way into the galley. As much as he missed Ichiraku ramen back home, he was not adverse to the food on the ship, though he wished they would try some pork in the food. As he made his way to the mess hall, he decided to order another meal. He took out his frog wallet and smiled at the good amounts of money he still had left from his last missions. He paid the cashier and took his food with him. He and his protector were currently taking different rooms in the upper cabins, and the rooms were spacious enough to allow private dining for the guests. As he made sure to balance the meals he was carrying, Naruto then recalled the time he had been placed on this mission. Flashback. In the Hokage's office. What? You can't be serious, Tsunade Obasan. Naruto shouted in a loud voice as he digested just what Tsunade had called him to the tower for. He had just done another mission for today as he and his team had lost track of Sasuke and Orochimaru yet again, and it frustrated him to no end that Sasuke was still not coming back, and now this. Tsunade glared and shouted right back at him. Quit shouting, Naruto. And I am serious. Naruto felt a vein pop on his head as he and Tsunade, with a vein on her head as well, glared at one another, while Shizune and Sakura were watching, along with Sai, Yamato, and Kakashi. Sai was the only one who was not showing any emotion on his face, as for his training en route, but the others, however, were tense and worried as the two glared at one another. They had seen Tsunade angry before and were not in the mood to court the legendary Kunoichi's temper, but Naruto was among the very few people they knew who was far from intimidated, and over the years proved that he was not going to back down easily. The two still glared at each other for a few more minutes until Naruto decided to just cool his head, and he sighed and glared at Tsunade. Fine, I'll do it, but you still could have just sent someone else, Tsunade Obasan. Yes, I would have, but I prefer that you go since you've been working non-stop lately. You're not going to be able to track Sasuke if you're down and out, Naruto-kun, and he's not been seen weeks, so we think he might be on the move as well. So just to be sure, you can try finding clues while they're in Sea Country on the off chance that he and Orochimaru are up to something there. Naruto smiled widely at that as Tsunade smiled a bit at the look of happiness on his face, but she was still being serious about this and spoke with authority to Naruto. But make one thing clear, Naruto-kun. Do not try to do things on your own, and don't use your new Rasengan no matter what. Do not try to engage either Sasuke or Orochimaru if you run into them. Do you understand me? Naruto looked at Tsunade and saw a slight pleading look in her normally cool and tough facade, and having known how Tsunade had suffered when the two men she loved in her life died from Shizune, the niece of her loved one Dan, he knew that she would never forgive herself if anything happened to him. He might argue with Tsunade, but he did respect her and he knew that she respected him back, so he should at least show faith in her judgment, and even if it was a bit flawed at times, it truly helped him grow stronger, not just in his overall skills as a ninja, but as a person. With that in mind, he nodded. I won't do anything foolish, Tsunade Obasan. I promise. Tsunade looked at the blonde ninja and sighed with a bit of relief as she could see that he meant every word. As much as she wished not to let him loose, she knew that she said herself that Naruto would become a great ninja and an even better Hokage in the near future. After all, his father had been one himself. Tsunade and her teammate Jiraiya were among the very few who truly knew about Naruto's relationship to the fourth Hokage, and who his mother was. He so resembled them both it was uncanny, and she wanted him to survive to fulfill his dream. Granted, her method was a bit off the wall, but it worked as Naruto grew even stronger. However, she knew better than to let him go alone without any supervision. You're going to be accompanied by another on this mission, Naruto-kun, so don't think that you're going to be on your own all the time. Naruto then looked at Tsunade and wondered just who she was going to assign to keep an eye on him. He knew that it couldn't be Shizune since she was Tsunade's secretary and she needed to work with all the paperwork in the village. It certainly wasn't going to be Kakashi since he had been assigned to fill in for the deceased Asuma until Shikamaru, Choji, and Ino got a new sensei. Yamato was taking the time to help Jiraiya track Akatsuki. Sai was getting used to working with the others, and he was still not used to having the guy around, and as much as he would have wanted it, Sakura had duties to take care of here in Konoha as well, so just who was Tsunade Obasan going to pair him with? He got his answer as a knock came on the door, and when it opened, a female voice came into the room. You wanted to see me, Hokage-sama. Naruto turned and spotted someone who he didn't recognize at first, until he looked a bit further at her face. Why does she look so familiar to me? End of flashback. Naruto learned later from Kakashi that he was being accompanied by Azuki Yugo, an ANBU that he had trained with years before in his time in the military arm of Konoha, and she was Gekko Hayate's former girlfriend. He recalled that Hayate was among those killed in the attack of Sand when Orochimaru had duped Sand into attacking his home village, though the Chunin swordsman had been killed before that attack itself. The woman was currently resting in the room that she stayed in and apparently was very tired with all the traveling they had been doing once they got into Sea Country. They had done their mission to deliver the Hokage's message to the leader they had to visit, but to his disappointment, they found no trace of either Sasuke or Orochimaru. It felt like going back to square one all over again. Naruto put those thoughts aside as he arrived in front of Yugo's room and he knocked on the door, hoping that Azuki was awake. The door opened and the violet-haired female Anbu opened the door. She was not dressed in her Anbu armor for this mission and was instead dressed in the same fashion as Kakashi or Yamato was and had only the vest off. Yugo looked at Naruto in a bit of surprise as she appeared to have been somewhat busy before he had arrived. What is it, Naruto-kun? Sorry to disturb you, Yugo-san, but I brought you your breakfast. I don't know what you liked, so I hope this is okay for you. The female Anbu looked at the wrapped meal and smelled the food. She smiled at Naruto gently and moved aside. Please come in, Naruto-kun. Thank you for bringing it to me. Naruto smiled as he walked into the spacious room that Yugo stayed in. The room was well furnished and comfortable, just like his room without being too showy. The Hokage had managed to place a good deal of money on the operation, though Naruto was rather thrifty in that regard and kept a good amount of his money hidden away for further use, and away from Jiraiya, so not all of the money was from Konoha's accounts. Yugo's vest was on a nearby chair next to a table and she was currently working on checking up on her supplies of weapons. Naruto waited for Yugo to move the weapons aside and he placed her break fast on the table. The female Anbu smiled at how nice the young genin was when he placed her break fast on the table. He certainly was quite the gentleman, and so unlike the Kyuubi inside of him. Like many people from nearly 12 years ago, Azuki Yugo knew of the Kyuubi being sealed inside of Naruto by the Yondaime, though she was very young at the time. And it had been quite a number of years since she had seen the young blonde as she had grown up when training in the ANBU. She had met him in the funeral of the Sandaime after Sarutobi was killed and she had to admit that the young boy had grown up a lot since she had seen him when he was a baby. In fact, when she had seen him in the Hokage's room, she was a bit surprised that the blonde teen looked vaguely familiar to her until she was told who he was. The first few thoughts that came to her mind were how much he had grown since she had last seen him. How tall he was. And he certainly had grown a lot more good-looking. At the remembrance of that last thought, she chided herself for thinking of such things. Besides, Naruto was still too young. Granted, he was no longer 12 years old, but she did have 8 years ahead of him, and it was odd for her to think that way of the blonde kid. Now he was already nearing the age for that sort of thing, but she shouldn't think about such things for now. She still held on to the memory of her past love Hayate, and she still cared for his memory, and while it was hard knowing that he was gone, she still cared for him. And as such, it was hardly proper for her to think about these things involving Naruto of all people. But he was still a nice boy nevertheless. As Naruto placed down the food, he then thought that he felt he had forgotten something, and it didn't take very long for her to find out what it was that he had forgotten. Darn, I forgot to get a drink. What do you want to drink, Yugo-san? I'll pay for it. Yugo smiled at him and replied to his question. Just some jasmine tea if you don't mind. Sure. I'll just drop my food off in my room and get you your tea, Yugo-san. With that, Naruto left Azuki as he went to his room to place away his own break fast, allowing the Anbu the time to study her food, and found some good sushi, sashimi, rice balls, and tempura with beef pot, with some vegetables as well. The female Anbu smiled as she sat down and began to have her break fast. As she ate her meal, she began to think about how things had been in Konoha after the invasion. Her fellow Anbu had been pulling double duty ever since the attack by Sand and Sound, and so had she when she was part of the routine patrols and more. It had been stressful for her, even more so now that Hayate was gone. Hayate and her had been very close when they were younger, as she used to watch out for him due to his chronic sickness. Despite that, he was a good ninja and worked hard despite the occasional coughs that indicated his health, and she admired him for that. However, at times she wished that he would take better care of his health when he could have the time. As they both got older, she and Hayate became closer, though her duties prevented them from getting closer when she became an Anbu and they had very few times together. However, they cherished those times together, and even if it was going to be hard, they hoped that maybe they would have a chance to make a life together in Konoha, and if they could, even have a family. But it was never meant to be when he was found killed days before the Chunin exam and the invasion of Sound and Sand, though she eventually found out that the Sand Jonin Baki was the one who killed Hayate. He vowed that he was willing to face her anger for the death of her beloved. However, she had gathered the courage to move on, and though she no longer had Hayate by her side, she still made sure to make him proud of her by continuing her duties in defending Konoha from those who threatened it. However, it was hard for her to move on, and at times she woke up and cried when she knew that she was alone in her room. No, Hayate-kun would have never wanted me to be moping all the time. I have to be strong and I have a duty to do. With that, Azuki managed to stop herself from crying and focused on her food, and she turned and smiled when Naruto once more knocked on the door. She had learned that the blonde ninja knocked on doors in a certain way, so she could tell that it was him on her door. She got up and opened the door, and sure enough, the blonde ninja was before her with a teacup and a small pot filled with warm jasmine tea on a tray. Here's your jasmine tea, Yugo-san. Azuki smiled warmly as she managed to keep herself from crying as she recalled how she and Hayate would drink the same tea together. She then reached out and took the tray. Thank you, Naruto-kun. No problem. I'll finish my own break fast and head off to the deck for training. I'll be there if you need me, Yugo-san. As Naruto walked into his room, Yugo smiled at him as she looked at his retreating form, and she once more found herself admiring the blonde ninja as he had been growing stronger and certainly looked a lot more impressive looking. She chided herself once more when she found herself looking at his posterior. Yugo blushed a bit and sighed as it had been so long since Hayate's death, and despite knowing some very nice-looking men in her time, she still didn't feel inclined to start another relationship. But she admitted that she was a woman after all, and like any normal woman she had needs too. The female Anbu put that aside as she went to her table and poured herself a nice hot cup of tea and drank the liquid as she finished the last of her break fast. After a few minutes of quiet reflection and relaxation, she wondered what she should be doing today. She didn't have many duties as she was only assigned to keep Naruto safe, and while she was not the best Anbu in the rest of the corps, she had enough skill for Kakashi to trust her with the safety of his student, and so did Tsunade. And she was not going to break that trust to either of them, as she was not planning to be sent back to being a genin once more. She sighed as she finished her meal and decided to go out and do something to relieve the boredom that had settled on her for some time. As she finished her meal and looked out into the ocean, she heard footsteps rushing out, and from the sound of the feet, it would no doubt be Naruto himself, and she wished him the best of luck with whatever training he was going to take. She then decided to observe just how skilled Naruto was, and then took out her own weapons and left her room. As she made her way to the deck, there were times that several male passengers gave her leering looks, but she ignored them as she moved to the deck to see to her charge. Hayate admitted that he was at times wondering why she, a beautiful woman, would be interested in him, but she assured him that she was serious about her feelings towards him, and he decided to leave it at that. This was happening since she was not wearing her normal Anbu attire to better fit into her mission of being Naruto's guardian. Speaking of which, she wondered just what sort of ruckus did Naruto start this time. However, it seemed that the peace was not going to last, as an alarm filled the air. Pirates! Azuki groaned and quickly rushed to the deck, and as she looked at a nearby window, there were indeed several smaller boats filled with pirates. The men on the ships appeared to be dressed in the usual garb worn by pirates and were armed with an assortment of weapons, from spears, harpoons, clubs, swords, and other weapons. Pirates plighted the waters on more than one instance and were always a nuisance to many shipping businesses. That was why some ship liners had their own corps of soldiers to fight them off. The female Anbu reached the deck and blocked a strike from a club with her kunai. She looked and found herself staring at a man who looked messed up with a beard caked in salt crystals and smelled of rotting fish. The man smiled at her in a disgusting manner, and paid for it as Azuki managed to kick him aside and defeat him, sending him crashing into three of his companions, and they too fell right back into the drink. Azuki turned around and spotted more pirates attacking, and before she could fight back, Cage Bushin Jutsu. She turned, and so did the pirates, as several bands of shadow clones belonging to a certain hyperactive blonde ninja came on the scene and bashed the living daylights out of the pirates trying to board the ship from the other side. The Cage Bushin were mixing it up with the pirates as Naruto himself was busy fighting one of the pirates, and a fairly large guy, almost the same size as the one he socked out cold with the aid of his Cage Bushin back when he, Sasuke, and Sakura were still younger and working together with Kakashi. The pirate had no time to react when he got beaten hard by the better skilled ninja. Azuki fought her way to Naruto and managed to be back to back with the blonde kid. Are you all right, Naruto-kun? I'm fine, but these guys aren't giving up so easily. Here they come again. Naruto and Azuki fought on with the pirates until they were aided by the ship's defenders. They were able to push the pirate back, but it didn't take long for the pirates to come up with attacks of their own, as they had comrades on smaller boats, and these guys were armed with bows and crossbows, all armed with fire arrows. The arrows came as several more pirate groups attacked, and even Naruto was getting overwhelmed, not because of the pirates, but because of both the battles with the pirates and putting out the fires at the same time, at first the fires were manageable, but with the pirates attacking and the fires spreading, even Naruto knew that the situation was not looking good. With that in mind, he sent his cage bush into the pirates and attacked their crew. And after a few minutes, the pirates were forced to retreat. However, the damage had been done, and while the pirates didn't get the loot they wanted, the ship they had attacked was too badly damaged as the fires spread too rapidly for the crew and the brave volunteers to contain as the ship burned. Naruto did his best to help contain the blaze so as the crew could leave, and the Kyuubi was not happy with what was going on. Kit, we've got to leave the ship now. She's burning too fast. I know that, Fox. Just give me a few more minutes until we can be able to get the others out of here. Damn it, Kit. Now is not the time to play the hero here. As Naruto helped keep the fires at bay, he was suddenly grabbed by Azuki, who had managed to get a lifeboat that was still moored in. The rest of the crew had already left the ship, and while there were others left on the ship, the female Anbu knew that it would already be too late for them to escape. Her main concern was Naruto-kun's safety, both as her duty to the Hokage and her own desire not to let this young man die after all the things he had done for the village. But there, I know Naruto-kun, but your safety is my concern. The female Anbu managed to get the blonde ninja on the boat, and as the boat was about to be lowered down, she was stunned to find that one of the containers in the deck was filled with explosive tags. Oh no! Azuki managed to get on the boat and push off until they were in the clear, but the tags exploded and the ship was blown apart. The female Anbu used her strength to steer the boat clear, and they seemed to be going out of it, but then Naruto blocked an incoming plank of wood that was burning hot and sending out embers. The plank was destroyed by the blonde ninja, but the explosion had sent out more debris from the burning ship, and some of them managed to hit home. Naruto was able to heal due to the Kyuubi's chakra. But the female Anbu was hit by a burning piece of wood hard on the shoulder, and had bypassed her vest's padding and placed splinters that were now buried deep into her right shoulder, and another burning piece of sharp wood struck her head on her head, making the female Anbu groan in pain and nearly fall off the boat as she was losing consciousness. However, she didn't fall into the water as Naruto managed to grab her, and the blonde managed to guide their boat away as the ship sank to the bottom of the sea. The blonde ninja then looked at his older guard and found Azuki to be unconscious from the blows to her body from the debris that hit her hard. As soon as he was sure that they were away from the burning boat, which was now out of sight, he looked at her wounds and he panicked as he saw the bits of wood that buried themselves on her shoulder and the bleeding from her head from a rather long gash on the back of her head. This is not good. What the hell am I going to do now? Naruto then realized that they were going to be in serious trouble if they were not able to make it to land and find a medical specialist fast to treat Azuki's injuries, and to make it worse, there were signs of rain coming in soon as the clouds began to gather. The blonde decided to do what he could for the female Anbu, but he had no idea how. The blonde didn't have any medical training to speak of, and he had no skills in medical jutsu at all. Man, I wish Sakura-chan was here. Kit, how bad is she hurt? She's bleeding really bad on the head and there's splinters of wood on her shoulder. The blonde heard his resident growl at that, and he waited for what the Kyuubi was going to say next. And he didn't have to wait very long. There's bound to be some islands near this area. We'll have to head west for now, there might be one there. But what about? Head wounds always bleed badly, Kit. But check her head, is it cracked or broken? Naruto slowly ran his hands on Azuki's head and noted that despite the blood, her head seemed fine. There were no signs of cracking as far as he could sense. I don't feel anything, but what can we do? I don't know any medical jutsu. I noticed that, but we can fix that soon enough. Use your chakra like this. As Naruto followed the Kyuubi's instructions, he was relieved to see his blue chakra turn into green chakra, the type used in healing jutsus, and he noted that the head wound on Azuki was disappearing, though there was a lot of blood in her hair. The wound appeared to be holding as soon as he was finished, and the Kyuubi spoke to him. There, not the best medical jutsu you and I have, but it'll keep her wound from bleeding, keep the bones from cracking, and it'll allow her to mend on her own. What about the wood splinters on her shoulder? Shouldn't we remove them? We will, Kit, but not out here. Now haul that butt of yours and find an island. Naruto wasted no time and took the rudder and followed the direction west without argument. He would have wanted to trade word barbs with the kitsune, but now was not the time for such things as he had to ensure Azuki's safety first. As the boat made its way west for several hours, Naruto turned to look behind him and he swore as he spotted dark storm clouds moving towards them. That is not good. The blonde then focused on guiding the boat and as the boat moved on. Thankfully the currents were good. They were now a good distance ahead of the clouds, but the blonde knew better than to relax as he knew that the medical jutsu he used was not permanent and Azuki needed proper medical care if she was to be fine. He heard her moan in pain as the motions of the waves made her body move to hit the sides of the boat. Though that was slow, the splinters were buried deeper in her flesh, making her groan more in pain. Damn it, we've got to do something. Quit yelling, Kit. We're almost there. See those birds? Naruto looked and spotted several gulls flying away from the approaching storm clouds that were still a good distance away from them, but gaining speed. I see them. So what? Think, Kit. Birds like them have nests around here, and the only place they'd nest is on islands. Those birds are heading home from the storm, and right to an island. Keep an eye on them for as long as you can. The blonde followed the Kyuubi's advice and after several more minutes, they spotted a large island ahead of them, and seemed to have a good deal of foliage, trees, and some large cliffs as well. The place looked ordinary, but after all they had gone through for several hours, the island seemed like paradise as Naruto used the tides to guide him into the island. Later on the island, Naruto was tired as he took Azuki and placed her to lie on her stomach the walls of the cave, careful not to aggravate the wound she still had on her head and also the splinters. The cave walls came in handy to keep her safe from the winds that were now blowing about. As soon as they hit the island, the storm clouds came and the place became really choppy. Thankfully he was able to use the Kyuubi's chakra to enhance his strength to take the boat into the beach and took out the rope and tie the boat securely, and he then took out the female Anbu from the boat and found a large cave near the beach, which he was currently inside of now. As he did so, the rain hit the island hard and the winds coming into the cave were wet and cold. This made Naruto shiver and he knew that he had to help Azuki first, but he knew they needed a fire and fast. There should be some driftwood in this cave. Better go look for it as soon as you can, Kid, and get a fire going. But what about Azuki? We can't leave her like this. Keep your damn shirt on, Kit. If you want, take off that jacket of yours and use it as a blanket for her when you have the chance. But for now, we need to find wood for a fire, or else the cold will make things worse. Naruto sighed and looked about. Using a small flare from a small bundle that he had with him in his pouch, he had to leave behind his scroll back in Konoha to make some extra room for the flares. He didn't think they would be useful, but Kakashi insisted and now he would have to thank that Jonin for the advice. Thankfully there was enough driftwood and he then got a fire going with some of the other flares, but kept some back, just in case. As soon as he was done with the fire, the Kyuubi then told him to start tending to Azuki. He removed the Anbu's vest gently, trying to avoid the blood and aggravating the wounds she had. The wood splinters were long and very much jagged and Naruto had to be very careful in removing them as he used his newly trained but not perfected medical jutsu to seal the wounds as he pulled each splinter out and made sure to double check for any leftover splinters as he did so. Some of the splinters were very deep and he had to bite back his discomfort as he tried to keep Azuki calm as she would sometimes move about in pain. Thankfully, the state of unconsciousness she was in made that a bit easier on him as she was not moving too much to aggravate her wounds. As soon as he was done with that part of the job, Naruto took a deep breath and sat back as the splinters of wood were no longer there and the wounds were now sealed. Don't relax just yet, Kit. We need to get rest cause this day has only just begun. Naruto nodded as he gently rolled Azuki back to her back and took off his jacket and used it to keep her warm and used her vest as a makeshift pillow for her head. As he did so he lay down next to her and despite being a bit cold, he went to sleep, unaware of the fact that Azuki began to move in her sleep and she draped her arm and leg on him. The next day, Naruto awoke to the sound of the waves lapping in the beach and he wondered for a moment why he felt that there were some things on his body, and when he turned to the side, he yelped a bit as he found himself looking at Azuki square in the face. That made Naruto blush bright red as he was treated to seeing the woman in her sleep. He slowly moved away as Azuki moaned out and he heard a work. Hayate. Naruto was a bit confused at that, until he recalled the Chunin examiner who died before Sand invaded his home when they had been duped by Orochimaru. He sighed and felt sorry for Azuki to have lost someone she cared deeply about. He knew how that felt as well. He had lost some people important in his life, the Sandaime, Haku, and most of all, Sasuke. He however put those feelings aside for now as he knew that he had to take care of Azuki until she was feeling better. The Kyuubi was already awake and spoke to him. You okay, Kit? Yeah, I'm fine. Good. Cause we need to find some food and supplies fast if we're going to be here on this island for a while. We will need to find some herbs to patch up her wounds more since the medical jutsu we used isn't permanent, so haul Kit. The blonde nodded as he left the cave and went out to find whatever food and supplies he could get. The island turned out to be one of 3 large islands and it was the largest one yet, and there were a lot of things that could be found edible on the island. There were large amounts of berries and more there, though the Kyuubi warned Naruto on which ones to take and which ones to avoid due to poisons in them. The two managed to find several birds' nests and took some of the eggs with them, along with catching some small fish in a nearby river and some small rabbits as well. The two then moved on and the Kyuubi found several patches of naturally growing herbs that had medicinal qualities and told Naruto to take as much as he needed. The two then returned to the cave and placed their catches on the ground as Naruto found a good stream of fresh water nearby at a pool near the cave. That was a good sign according to his resident, as fresh water was far better than salt water, as salt water was not fit to drink by any means, unless purified. Naruto then wondered if he should wake Azuki up from her slumber, but the Kyuubi advised against it. Her mind needs to heal for a while, Kit, so don't try to wake her up. Not to mention we still need to treat those wounds of hers, but first, we need to eat. Naruto then followed the Kyuubi's directions as the 9-tailed fox showed him how to boil the fish and the eggs by digging a deep pit in the sand outside, wrapping the food in thick leaves with some flavoring herbs and then burying the food into the pit and placing several large heated stones around the leaf bundles using a stick to take the stones out of the fire that he started, and then buried the pile under with sand. It would take some hours for that to be done and he then got the remaining fish on spit sticks to cook over the fire. He then got to work and skinned the rabbits carefully, and then when he was done, he cooked those as well. The blonde ninja was tired from all the work, but he was then told by the Kyuubi to gather some more items to treat the still recovering and asleep Anbu. Naruto nodded and went out and found some clean stones that were smooth and easy to grip and some coconuts that could be opened. Naruto went to work as the Kyuubi instructed as he opened one of the coconuts and took out the water to quench his thirst and scraped off the meat to be eaten and used later on. The shell became a pestle as Naruto placed the herbs into it and mixed it with small amounts of water as he began to gently crush the herbs. It was hard work as the day pressed on and the sun came up, but the blonde ninja did what he had to do to ensure the well-being of not just himself but Azuki as well. He would make sure to check on the rabbits and fish and turn them to cook them properly to avoid food poisoning. As he did so, he also checked on the female who slumbered and noted that the wounds were still not fully sealed. He was a bit worried as he checked her condition as best she could. So far she was fine, but he had to be very sure before he moved on. He then went back to the herbs and after a few hours, the herbs were ready. The paste was a bit odd, but the Kyuubi assured Naruto that the mix would be very helpful in patching up Azuki and her wounds. He took the coconut shell with the herbal paste and several leaves and some neatly sliced rope that he managed to salvage from the boat and got to treating Azuki's wounds. He found the cut on her head and gently placed the herbal paste as much as he could. Though Azuki hissed at the pain, he continued until the Kyuubi told him to stop, and he then used a large leaf to cover the wound and used the rope to make a makeshift binding. It wasn't comfortable, but it was all he had to work with at the moment. However, when it came to doing the same thing on Azuki's shoulder wounds, which meant having to remove her clothes. The blonde was very much too embarrassed to continue. You've got to be kidding me. Do I sound like I'm kidding, Kit? Besides, all those magazines you've been reading to make that waijutsu of yours should have already made you familiar with the female form, right? So why acting like it's your first time? Because it is my first time, you darn fox. Wait a minute, you mean to tell you've never peeked in the women's bathroom before? Never. If Sakura-chan found out about that, she would beat the tar out of me for even thinking it. I don't even want to guess how Tsunade-san would react if she found out. Ah, well then, think of this as your best chance to do just that without being interrupted by either of them. Besides, unless we get that herbal balm on those wounds of hers, she'll still be in danger, so swallow your embarrassment, kid, and get to it. Naruto sighed and went to work on removing the clothes Azuki had, and as much as he tried to resist the temptation, he couldn't help but admire Azuki's female form as he removed her upper clothes, and he had to admit that she certainly was attractive. Her face looked beautiful despite the rope that was there that held her head bandage secure, and her purple-black hair was smooth and silky, not mention her full red lips. And Naruto blushed brightly as he realized just where his thoughts were going. He admitted that he was no longer the naive 12-year-old that he was years ago, and he had grown up a lot since then. He might still act like a kid at times, but not all the time. He found himself staring at times at Sakura, knowing that despite his previous statement of her not changing in the least, he noted that she had grown more attractive. He found himself staring at Tsunade at times, even though he knew that she was using hench. He even caught himself staring at Hinata or Ino or Shizune, and despite his disbelief, he even found himself staring at Anko. The women mentioned were attractive, and so was Azuki. As soon as he removed her upper clothes, he blushed bright red when he saw her which were in her bra. They were large, not in the same caliber as that of some of the other women he had seen, including Tsunade, but just enough to merit attention. Naruto felt all the blood in his body go off in two directions, one to his face as he tried to control himself from having a nosebleed, while the other portion went to his loins at the sight of the half-woman before him. She was very much a strong woman, and her training in the Anbu was obvious as she was both slim and strong at the same time. He could see the strength in her form and face, and even when she was asleep, he admitted that she was attractive, even with that strange tattoo she had on her arm. Hey Kit, I know that you like the show right now, but we've got work to do right now, so stop staring at her. Now follow my directions so we can get this done with and have breakfast. Those fish and eggs should be done about now, along with the rabbits and fish. Naruto followed the instructions given by the Kyuubi as he made sure to place the herbal balm paste on the still healing wounds on Azuki's shoulder. The woman was still out of it, but the Kyuubi assured him that she was recovering on a good enough pace on her own. All they had to do was make sure that her wounds would heal well. It took him a bit more to finally finish placing the balm, and he then used the leaf to cover the balm, and despite his discomfort, he made the move to place the leaf underneath her bra so the article of cloth could hold the leaf on its own. Naruto then placed back on Azuki's clothes and then went to check on the food, and he was happy to note that the food was well cooked and ready for consumption. He took in his fill of the food and then decided to make some soup from the leftover meat and herbs in water. As soon as the soup was made and was good enough to eat, he was shown by the Kyuubi on how to make a spoon from a piece of wood with his kunai. Thankfully he still had his kunai and shuriken to help him out, along with the flares as well. Azuki took in the soup gently as she was helped up by Naruto, who was careful not to spill the soup, and the blonde was happy that she was at least eating something to help her keep her strength. As soon as she finished the soup and the meat and herbs, it was already midday, and the Kyuubi decided that it would be better that they explore the island to see what else they could find in order to ensure that until rescue was possible they would be in good hands. Naruto was tired and consumed the remaining food and berries, and as soon as he was ready, the Kyuubi began to lecture him about what they needed in order to survive in this place. The two worked on getting more wood, leaves, vines and whatnot to build a shelter and not rely too heavily on the cave, since the high tides could become a problem if the cave got flooded. The blonde ninja was sweating as he did the work and followed the creation of a crude, but dry and strong shelter as per instructions handed to him by his resident, though the Kyuubi at times wondered why Naruto acted this way at times, but decided not to be bothered by it as he directed his container on how to make the shelter waterproof and strong against the wind. Naruto looked at the shelter and admitted that while it certainly wasn't a house, it would certainly be a good place to stay in and was close to where the beach was. The Kyuubi nodded in approval and they then went to work finding whatever they could to make things easier here on the island. As they explored the area, the two spotted the other island and noted what appeared to be a wreck of a ship in the area. The Kyuubi looked at the image carefully through the viewing portal he had in order to see what Naruto was seeing. You see what I see, Kyuubi? Yeah, judging by the hull, I'd say that it's a merchant ship that run aground. We better go see if there's anything we can salvage from the ship. We're going to need supplies kit. We can't leave Azuki-san like that right now. The island's not that far, Kit. And we've already treated her wounds. Let's go see and find what we can. Besides, we might find, if we're lucky, a medical supply kit there on the boat, plus other things that can really save our asses. This is something we can't pass up. Later, Naruto sighed and admitted the Kyuubi was right as he steered the boat back to the main island where he and Azuki were on. The wrecked ship was large and while the elements had ravaged the ship, it seemed that a good deal of supplies and equipment was left. There were some extra clothes and cloths in containers that could be cleaned and used as bandages. Wrappings, rope and more. There were also supplies such as oil for lamps and the lamps themselves, rope, metal support beams, matches, flares, utensils, containers for water, some cooking utensils, and whatnot. There was also a herbal medicine kit, all the things that could really count, along with several other good items, a ball of fishing line, a box of needles, some tools, and more, all the things needed to keep things going. Well now, not a bad haul kit. I guess. Hey Kyuubi. Yeah, thanks for all the help. I owe you big. Ha, you owe me nothing, Kit. You're my container and until I do find a way out I'll do what I can to keep you from dying, for my sake and yours. I'm just doing what comes naturally. How do you know so much about what you taught me this morning? I mean, I thought, well, you only lived for destruction. Well, that is true, but don't forget, Kit. I'm already an immortal and I've lived in this world long before your village ever existed, or the countries for that matter. Plus, I do get bored easy even with fighting, so I pass the time learning other things, and when I pose as a human at times, they certainly help. You pose as human. I didn't know that. Ha. There's a lot you don't know about me or my kind, Kit. Let's just say that I know ways on clone jutsus that not even the cages know about. I'll tell you about them someday, but let's hurry up and check on the patient, shall we? Naruto nodded as he once more parked the boat and went to check on Azuki and smiled a bit as she was doing well and there were no signs of infection in her body at the moment. As soon as he was able to check her condition and be thankful that she was fine, he went on to catch some more food and make some new herbal balm as well. He took a few of the containers and found a spring on the island which had cold fresh water and took it with him to make sure that he and Azuki had fresh water for drinking, cooking, and more. The blonde then made more soup for Azuki while making a blanket for her and a new fire as well to keep them dry. As they were done, he once more fed the soup to Azuki, who took it in and she sighed softly as she took in the food. He then placed the blanket on her and took in some of the leftover food, and as soon as the blonde felt full, he decided to take a quick dip in the sea for a swim, and despite his still embarrassed state he was now bare of his clothes and got in a good swim for a few minutes to cool off. He then returned and made sure to keep the sleeping Anbu company and to monitor her condition. As the day wore on and reached the night, Naruto had managed to build a large signal fire, under the Kyuubi's instructions as well, and made sure to have fuel ready to keep the fire prepared. As soon as he was done with the signal fire, he was able to catch some more fish and rabbits, along with some wild vegetables that he was able to find. He made some new soup for Azuki from vegetables, meat, and herbs. He managed to use a container and helped Azuki take in her food. The sleeping ninja smiled and was now resting nicely as he then went on the same process as before to help seal her wounds. He removed the bandages and smiled a bit as the wounds healed well, and he then replaced the leaf bandages and used the cloth ones, this time after cleaning them properly and making sure that they were in good condition. Once the new bandages were set in, things were a lot easier, as the Kyuubi then told him that they both needed to sleep and it seems that Azuki would soon be waking up. Naruto smiled and closed his eyes at the news and went to sleep. If the Kyuubi was right, then they could say the new shelter that he had built earlier that day and would avoid a possible flooding if the tides were too high. The next day. Where am I? Last I remember was steering away from the boat when the explosive tags went off. Wait. Where's Naruto-kun? Azuki opened her eyes and found herself in a cave of some sort, and she felt some throbbing pain that was fading, at least. That made her recall the injuries she had sustained before, and that made her worry as she reached the back of her head and was surprised to find a bandage there. And as she reached her shoulder and noted that underneath her clothes was another bandage, she looked and noted that while the bandages were not the best, they did their job well. She looked and saw Naruto sleeping nearby, and as she drifted a bit closer, she noted how peaceful he slept, showing to her that he must be very exhausted to be sleeping this late in the day. The Anbu then realized that this meant that Naruto had been taking care of her while she had been out, and she couldn't help but smile warmly at the sleeping blonde ninja. She saw that despite the still existing prejudice to him, he was proving to be so different. He had a kind heart, a gentle nature, and a warm soul. Not to mention he had certainly grown in looks while he was at it. She checked her inner chakra and smiled as it was in the best of status and decided to go out and get some stretching done and maybe get cleaned up. Later, Naruto awakened and was partially awake since had been very busy since yesterday, but his sleepiness vanished the very second he spotted Azuki no longer on the bed. Panic filled him and wondered if something or someone had gotten to her while he had been sleeping. He quickly took out his kunai and looked about, panic increasing until he decided to get out of the cave and find the female Anbu just in case something had happened to her. He then decided to wake the Kyuubi up and get his help in finding the woman. Wake up, Kyuubi. Arg. Knock it off. You better have a damn good reason for the shouting, Kit. I do. Azuki's gone. She's what? Gone. We've got to look for her now. The two went out to look for her, and as far as things went, they were not having any luck at the moment around the beach area, and there were no signs of anyone having been on the island, as he only saw his footprints. That is, until he spotted the other set of footprints, and that meant that Azuki had walked out of the cave and into the interior of the island. Naruto felt a bit of relief, but was not entirely sure and went after the footprints into the interior. As he made his way into the island, he began to use his senses to track Azuki and use the trees as well as he leapt from branch to branch in his usual fashion. It was then that he spotted a river and heard a small waterfall nearby. And it was then that he spotted Azuki, who had taken off her clothes and was only in her bra and panties. The blonde ninja stopped dead in his tracks as he saw the woman once more unclad, and he was stunned as, despite seeing her bandages, the female Anbu was certainly beautiful to look at, and it was not surprising that she and Hayate had a relationship. The blonde then realized that he was staring at her while she was nearly like a pervert. For some reason, she wanted to do this with Sakura for a while, but knowing how his mentor Jiraiya fared when he did the same thing with Tsunade, and knowing that Sakura had the same strength as Tsunade did, made him very much cautious at the idea. But now those fantasies were being replaced by a woman with purple hair. Wow, she's hot. Makes me wish I was back in human form again. Let me tell you something, Kit. I might despise humans, but I kind of envy them in a way, namely when it comes to getting. Shut up, you darn fox. Closing parenthesis. Deny it all you like, Kit, but I know you like what you see. Naruto gulped as he felt his nose beginning to gush out blood as he continued to stare at Azuki as she was apparently washing her clothes in the river. The female Anbu didn't seem to notice his presence, and that made Naruto wonder if this was some illusion he was looking at, and sure enough, the female Anbu disappeared in a puff of smoke, and Naruto barely had enough time to block an incoming kunai which was being held by a person. The two landed on the ground with Naruto on the bottom and giving off a groan as he looked upward and saw Azuki, who was in her bra and panties right on top of him. Apparently she must have sensed his arrival and had prepared an ambush on the off chance that it wasn't him. Azuki realized that it was indeed him as her look of killer intent was replaced with shock and recognition. Naruto-kun. Oh, I'm sorry, are you all right? Yeah, sorry for startling you, Azuki-san. The two looked at one another for a few minutes and they then realized that the two of them were in a very compromising situation. Azuki realized that she was still in her undergarments, and while she was not very bothered by this all the time, it was a bit risque to be on top of a young teen in her bra and panties. For Naruto, he was trying his absolute best not to stare, but was failing miserably as he was still looking at Azuki, who was still on top of him, straddling his waist, and he could feel his body react to the presence of the nearly female on top of him, namely on a certain part of his anatomy as it began to react, and he prayed to the heavens that the female Anbu didn't feel that. She would kill him for sure if she found out he was getting an erection when she was right on him, despite how normal it was when a man was being straddled by a gorgeous woman in her skivvies. Azuki noted that, however, and only pretended to not notice his erection as she smiled warmly at the thought of him being aroused. He was already at the age for that sort of thing, but he seemed to be so shy about it. And she then noted the fierce blush that was growing on his face and smiled warmly at that as she decided to tease the blonde ninja. Like what you see, Naruto-kun? I. Azuki realized that now was not the time to tease him and sighed as she got off of him and helped him to his feet. The blonde then turned around quickly, trying his absolute best to hide himself from her, to shield his utter embarrassment from her, along with his physical reaction to her nearness. The blonde then spoke slowly and tried to explain why he was in the where to avoid her making the wrong assumption. I woke up and didn't find you. I thought something happened and I went to look for you. I didn't mean to. Azuki used her chakra to heat the stones nearby to dry her clothes, and she then put them on once they were all dry. She then smiled and made Naruto turn and face her, and she smiled at him. It's all right, Naruto-kun. Thank you for the concern. I'm sorry if I startled you. Later, the two went to work as soon as Azuki allowed Naruto to check her bandages, and she smiled as the way Naruto moved his hands on her. He was blushing once more. He apparently had some difficulty dressing her wounds when she was still asleep, but now that she was awake and aware of his every move, that made him very uncomfortable and cautious in order to avoid doing something that would seriously offend her. The female Anbu was enjoying this in a nice way as she liked to tease Naruto for some reason. However, she had to thank him for taking care of her for nearly 2 days until she woke up. As soon as he was able to change the bandages and place the new medicine on her shoulder and the back of her head, the two went to work and gathered their gear and moved out of the cave and into the large shelter that Naruto had been able to build before. The female Anbu admitted that the place was dry, cozy, and was large enough for them to be in the place, though she could tell that Naruto was not entirely happy with the idea of sleeping close to her, which made her wonder why the student of the well-known pervert Jiraiya would be so shy. But that was what made catching a man a challenge for a woman, she should know after all. They then caught some fish and got a few bird eggs and had their breakfast and took the time to relax as Naruto filled her in on the details of what had happened when she had been injured and lost consciousness. The female Anbu smiled with surprise and gratitude as Naruto told her everything, and she could help herself as she giggled at his blush when she was told of the time he had to treat her wounds. After they had eaten and spoken to one another, the two decided to rest for now and use the leaves that Naruto had gathered as temporary mattress, and it was covered with a large blanket that he was able to find, and it was fresh as well since the container it was in was well preserved and well sealed as well. There were some other clothes, though they were a bit larger for Azuki, but would do well as they would be useful in keeping her normal ninja garb dry. The clothes were for civilians and there were clothes for Naruto as well, allowing him to keep his normal outfit in reserve. The two were now wearing civilian clothes, with Naruto wearing a white cotton shirt with no sleeves, and a pair of long shorts, as well as he kept his headband on, and so does Azuki. The two recovered from their rest and then decided to go hunting for food for lunch and also to gather whatever supplies that were still on the boat that Naruto might have missed when he was on board. The blonde was not sure it was a good idea for her to come along, but she insisted and they did so. As soon as they were able to gather some more fish, wild herbs, wild vegetables, fruits, coconuts, and a few more rabbits, along the way they even managed to catch a pair of goats. This told them that the large island had a large number of wildlife, but they had to be careful not to take too many or they would run out of food. The supplies they had certainly helped when it came to catching the fish on the beaches. They used the small box of needles to make fishing hooks using several tools and a rock to bend the needles properly, along with using some wood to make fishing rods and some leftover fish and meat to act as bait. As they did their tasks, the two began to spend some time doing other things apart from hunting, gathering, and salvaging supplies. When they came to the second island where the boat wreckage was, they explored and found a large number of other animals, namely wild pigs, birds, wild chickens, shellfish, and more, along with more fresh fruits that grew in the interior of the island. They also found other ships that had been marooned as well, and decided to use one of the small and old yet still serviceable and seaworthy ships they found to haul more supplies from them. They were tempted to make a large boat and make their way back to Konoha, but they had no maps and navigational tools with which to work with, and the maps and tools from the ships were the ones that were destroyed by both time and weather. They however kept their spirits up as they got enough food to cook their lunch for the day, which consisted of wild vegetables, fish, herbs, meat, and shellfish that they managed to find, and the smell of the food was very relaxing and delicious as they cooked the food near the fire pit that Naruto made. As soon as the food was done and they were eating with the plates and utensils that Naruto salvaged before, the female Anbu was filled with some curiosity on how much Naruto had grown. As she had been busy with working on the defense of Konoha, she had been out of the loop so to speak for a very long time. She wondered just what exactly did Naruto learn and improve on when he was under the training of the Sannin Jiraiya. Naruto-kun. Yes. How was your training with Jiraiya? I didn't know you wanted to know, Azuki-san. Why do you want to know that? Call it natural feminine curiosity, but if you don't feel comfortable with it, then it's alright. No, it's okay, but it's kind of long and you might get bored, Azuki-san. Don't worry, it helps pass the time and keeps us busy. And tell me everything about your mission to Sand and also your battles with Akatsuki if you want to. Naruto smiled a bit at the vested interest the purple-haired woman had on his life and decided to tell her his travels under the watchful eye of the pervert sage and his encounters with Akatsuki. And like he said, the stories were long, but Azuki didn't mind as she listened open-heartedly to the whole thing, and she had to admit that Naruto had indeed grown a great deal, and that was impressive in itself, as he was certainly a bit different from the younger self that he was nearly 3 years ago when she had first seen him. As the day wore on, the two decided to finish what was left for dinner, and when the day turned to night, Naruto went to check on the signal fire and it was thankfully still dry and usable. As they turned in for the night on the large mattress that Naruto had made using large collections of leaves covered with another large bundle of cloth, the blonde ninja made sure to be on the other side from Azuki, not to offend her, but to keep him from doing something that he might regret. While Azuki smiled as she looked at how utterly nervous Naruto was while he was getting ready to sleep. However, before the two of them went to sleep, the blonde once more decided to check on Azuki's wounds, and the purple-haired Anbu smiled as she took off her upper clothes to help Naruto in his efforts. Once more the blonde ninja tried to keep his hormones from acting up as he saw Azuki's nearly upper form still covered at least by her bra. He managed to keep it together and removed the bandages from her shoulder and arm and looked at her injuries, to find them already healed and no longer open, and that gave him the chance to sigh in relief as she was fine now. When he told Azuki as she put back on her clothes, she smiled and realized that she could now take a full bath now, and she told Naruto about her plans for the day later. Naruto blushed at that and they both went to sleep. The next day, Naruto and Azuki woke up once more as the first slivers of early morning light came in on the beach, plus the sounds of waking animals told them that it was going to be a new morning on the island. Naruto woke up early so as to get ready for another run of looking for their next supplies of food, while Azuki woke up to go to the same river that she had been cleaning her clothes before and take a bath in order to freshen up as well. She had a feeling that since Naruto and her were the only people on the whole island, the blonde would be around soon enough. She put that out of her mind as she told Naruto her destination and left. There was no soap, but she didn't mind as long as she was able to get the dirt off of her body, and that was enough for her. As Naruto returned a few hours later with his catches, which included more bird eggs, berries, fish, shellfish, wild vegetables, and a small but strong wild boar that he managed to hunt down, he decided to place the food there for a bit in the camp and cook the fish, the boar on a spit. He then decided to go and get more fresh water. As he moved through the jungle, he heard splashing sounds of water and he realized that the sounds must be Azuki taking that bath she mentioned to him a while back when they woke up. The blonde then had to fight with the Kyuubi and his own hormones as they began to tell him that he should go take a peek and see just how attractive the purple-haired woman was without any clothes on. But the blonde ninja tried not to do it as he still had to head back to their shelter, and no doubt Azuki would beat the tar out of him if she caught him. With that conflict in his mind, he decided to just head back to the camp and wait. Damn it. Why do I think these things? Kit, it's normal for you to think those things, and trust me when I say that you are no different from any normal man with needs. You have no idea the kind of dreams of scene you have, especially with that pink-haired teammate of yours. I think that old perverted sage is rubbing off on you apart from me. Hey, who told you that you could just go ahead and invade my personal dreams about Sakura-chan? I don't need to invade those dreams of yours, Kit. You radiate them out so much it's maddening. But now you seem to be looking at that Yugo woman with more intent than a starving man looking at an all-you-can-eat buffet. And to tell you the truth, I want you to do it. You're nuts, you nine-tailed fox. Besides that, she might not like it if she finds out about me peeking at her. Trust me, Kit, when I say that you don't have to worry too much. Remember that time she straddled you in nothing but her bra and panties? That incident tells me that she doesn't mind you peeking at her when she's in the. And I'll admit, she's seriously hot. Naruto quickly blushed and his face was now bright red as he recalled that time when she was on top of him in her bra and panties. But he calmed down and spoke. Maybe that's true, but how would she react if about me being inside of you? I hate to bust your bubble, Kit, but she's an Anbu, and no doubt was a young girl when I came to Konoha years ago, before and after I was sealed inside of you by the fourth Hokage. I've got no doubts in my mind that she knows about me being inside of you, but I have to admit, she seems to be more mellow about that fact, unlike some people I can name, since she's never tried to harm you at all, right? I guess you're right about that. Still. Look, Kit, I'm just giving suggestions. It's up to you if you're actually going through with it. Though I hope you do. You have no idea how dull it is in here when you're not fighting. Naruto walked back and mumbled slightly about his hormones as he went to check on his food. Azuki smiled as she took her bath in the cool fresh water of the river and soaked her hair to get rid of the dirt there and clean her hair as well. She then thought about her time here, and she had to admit that it was nice to be here and not being bothered too much by her work. And she then thought about Naruto and why was it she was starting to like the blonde ninja. While she was by far his superior in terms of rank, she admitted that his level of training was far higher than hers now. And she had heard about how he had defeated one of the Akatsuki members along with several other ninja in the past. And she knew about his many successful missions as well with his old team. Plus she could tell through his chakra that he certainly was growing more adept at it as well. She had no doubt that he would one day be a worthy Hokage, but she knew it would not be easy, as there would still be those who would see him as the container of the Kyuubi or the Kyuubi itself. But unlike them, she had observed him for a long time before and she could tell that he was too gentle and kind-hearted to be a demon, and she had to admit, she did find him kind of cute as he was growing up. However, her thoughts went back to the time that she had teased the blonde teen, and while she admitted that it was unfair of her to do that to someone younger than her by 8 years, she couldn't help herself as she smiled at how utterly attractive he was when he blushed, and despite how odd it was at first to think about it, she sighed and wondered what she should do about it and decided to see how far this would progress. She had already moved on with Hayate, though that was hard to do. However, she was a strong woman by heart and was not going to let herself be discouraged now. With that in mind, she finished her bath, and once she dried herself and put back on her clothes, she then made her way back to the camp, and there she smiled warmly at the blonde ninja who was still cooking the food, and she then helped him. The rest of the day was spent in many ways, with both of them taking dips in the ocean for some swimming and then traveling throughout the rest of the island as they explored the other areas they didn't have time to look for. They however made sure to keep track of one another to make sure not to get lost on the large island that they were on at the moment. Along with that, they each made sure to keep a lookout for any ships in the area so they could rush back and quickly light the signal fire in order to call for help from the crew and captain of the vessel. They made sure not to go too far though. They came back for lunch, and as they relaxed a bit to look at the sea and the sun, afterwards, they each took different sides of the beach and went swimming. As they each changed clothes, with Naruto wearing a new pair of shorts and Azuki using tightly tied clothes to cover her clothes in order not to use her normal undergarments and make them rot away by the salt water. They spent the whole afternoon swimming and headed back towards the beach for a light meal, and as the sun set, they once more tried to spot any boats, and after dinner and making the fire to keep warm, they both went to sleep. Naruto slept first, allowing Azuki to once more study his features in peace, and this made her wonder if the ideas she had concerning her and Naruto were worth it. She decided to wait and see for herself soon enough as she too closed her eyes. The next few days for Azuki and Naruto were filled with activities to pass the time and wait for a rescue. Every morning, they checked the sea for signs of ships, and when it was still early, the two took turns bathing in the river, one guarding the other. They took the time to train in their respective styles and arts as it would help them pass the time after each time they had their meals in the morning, midday, and evening. They also took the time to explore the island as well and more thoroughly, and they found the place to be very much habitable, and that made them wonder why no one took the time to settle into this island during the time that it was here. There were some open areas as well, and the high mountain in the center no doubt had some ice and snow there on the top and could be where the source of fresh water was. The two then traveled to the other two islands, the second with the few boat wrecks and the other that appeared to be smaller and had no wrecks. There they found some more wild vegetables growing and good hardy soil, good enough to grow some things on the island as well. When they made it back to their main island, they took the time to also spar with one another. Azuki asked this in order to see just how much Naruto had grown, and Naruto was more than willing to take a shot at that, as this would be the very first time he would fight against a full Anbu. Kakashi had already left the Anbu and Azuki was his junior student in his time there. Azuki admitted that Naruto would still need to improve a bit, but she was assured of his talents as they spared with one another, while Naruto had to admit that Azuki was tough and fearless as she pushed him and then some. He didn't use his more lethal techniques, uses his elemental Rasengan, but she gave him a workout as she sued her Anbu training very effectively to keep him on his toes. After they had undergone their sparring sessions, the two moved about the island and along the way made several extra signal fires to make sure that they had all the bases covered and to make sure that if ever there came a ship nearby, then the extra signal fires would make it a lot easier for them to be spotted by the ships. The two then spent some time looking into the island, and they even took the time to climb the mountain on the island, and that allowed them to see the rest of the island and its sister islands as well. As they went back down to the lower plains, they walked in the fields and enjoyed the gentle breeze as it flowed into the area, along with the faint sounds of waves hitting the cliffs on the back of the island. As the two looked at the island while on the plains that also gave a good view over the trees, Naruto smiled and then lay down on the grass and smelled the fresh scents of the island plants and also the smell of the sea. The blonde ninja loved the peacefulness here, as this would at least be the chance to be away from Akatsuki for once, and he would at least be allowed to relax a bit without worrying about those guys going after them. Azuki smiled a bit and sat down next to Naruto as they enjoyed the tranquility of the island. This was among the things they did on the days, and they were enjoying it. However, there was tension between the two of them. Not hostile tension, but something else, as for the past few days, Naruto's dreams of being intimate with Sakura were slowly being replaced, and instead of seeing the pink-haired Kunoichi in his dreams, he found himself thinking of the purple-haired kunoichi he was stuck with on this island, and that made things uncomfortable at times when he went to sleep. It didn't make things easier when they kept themselves busy and he would then steal discreet glances at her direction, making him very aware of her every movement. The same could be said for the purple-haired woman as she began to feel an ache in her. It had been 3 years since her beloved Hayate's death, and while he was not gone for her mind completely and she wanted to keep his memory alive, she was still having these needs and desires for comfort, and those aches grew for a while, and the only man who was near was this teen beside her at night. She resisted those ideas, but they grew every time she saw him. It had been at least a few days now, and sooner or later, one of them was going to have to address this situation, and it seemed that one of them had now made the first move as Azuki decided to speak to Naruto as they finished another day and were now about to take to their mattress that now had pillows that had the skins of the rabbits stuffed in cloth and were tied in by fishing line. Naruto didn't know why, but he suddenly had this strange feeling that something major was going to happen soon. He then wondered as the sun began to fade how things were in Konoha. Back in Konoha, Tsunade was not in the best of moods at the moment, namely since it concerned Naruto's disappearance for the past few days, along with Azuki. She had sent messages to the survivors of the ship to gather whatever information she could piece together in order to determine where Naruto was. The good news that both Naruto and Azuki were safe and alive was overshadowed by the fact that they were missing. The Hokage sighed as she read the reports and hoped that soon they could go out and find Naruto and Azuki. The village was still the same as before, but there were those who were among the villagers who hoped for good news on when Naruto and Azuki would be found along with his escort. The other ninja were worried, namely Sakura, Shikamaru, Choji, Hinata, Tenten, Neji, Rock Lee, Ino, Shino, and Kiba, and even Sai wondered where the blonde ninja was. Even Kakashi, Jiraiya, and Yamato were worried about Naruto's long disappearance, and so was she. The blonde female Hokage liked Naruto a great deal. He had been the one who proved to her that dreams could come true, and he had a power that truly made a difference in this world. She recalled her own words to Shizune about Naruto being the only one who truly knew how it felt to be a Jinchuriki when her assistant had questioned her on why she would allow Naruto on such dangerous missions that involved Akatsuki. While she understood Shizune's worries as Dan's niece treated Naruto like a kid brother, she knew that Naruto would only grow stronger and he himself would not allow any harm to come to Konoha, as being on the move made it harder for Akatsuki to track him. She loved him like a brother and somewhat a son. She knew who Naruto's parents were, but decided not to tell him until the timing was right, but he made sure to do her best in that regard. After all, she did owe it to them. She turned as Shizune entered the room. Any word? Shizune nodded with a smile as she looked at her ever-present clipboard. We've managed to locate a witness from the pirate attack who said that he saw a blonde ninja with orange and black clothes steering a boat in a direction to the west where the boat had sank. He also mentioned that there was a woman with him, both wearing Konoha forehead protectors. I've run through the passenger list and the descriptions match Naruto-kun and Azuki-san Tsunade-sama. Tsunade smiled at that and sighed. Thank Kami they're alive. Anything else? Yes. There appears to a small band of islands in that direction that appear to be habitable, since it seemed that some ships were lost before in that area and the crew were rescued from there. Judging by the direction that Naruto-kun and Azuki-san took when they abandoned ship, they could very well be in that area right now. The blonde Hokage smiled at the news as Kakashi, Yamato, and Jiraiya came into the room. The three men were relieved to hear the news that Naruto was still alive, and the female Hokage knew that sooner or later, the rest of Naruto's fellow classmates would hear about it soon enough. For now, however, the blonde Hokage decided to make things quick and send out messengers to the port city to prepare a rescue effort. It naturally didn't take too long for the others to find out about the rescue effort, as the village heard rumors of Naruto being alive and was about to be found. Some of the people who still treated him as the Kyuubi were not happy, while those who saw him differently were relieved indeed. This included Hiyashi, head of the Hyuga clan, as he had to thank Naruto for all he had done. Not only was he able to give his daughter Hinata more confidence in herself, but helped Neji learn the truth of the past events and allowed him to mend his relationships with his nephew and daughter, Kurenai, as well, for helping her reach out to Yakumo, becoming friends with Kiba, and helping Hinata become more confident, and many others including Chuki and his daughter Ayame, who treated Naruto as their best customer and friend. Sakura was happy most of all since she was worried sick of what might happen with Naruto. She made a promise never to let him be harmed or killed by Akatsuki, and she took it hard when he vanished for a few days. The news that he was alive made her feel happy. She admitted to herself that she liked Naruto, but only as a friend, namely since she knew that considering their past interactions, Naruto might have given up on her already, but she felt that they would always be close no matter what. Hinata was also happy, as well as her cousin Neji told her the news, and she was happy that Naruto was soon to be found. She and the others were eager to see just when they would be able to finally locate Naruto and get him out of whatever mess he found himself in. Back on the island, Naruto was about to get some shut-eye when he spotted Azuki looking at him for some reason, and that made him wonder just what was it the purple-haired Kunoichi had in mind. "Azuki-san, is something wrong?" The purple-haired woman smiled and replied. "I wanted to ask you something, Naruto-kun. It's very important to me, and I guess to you as well when you answer it." Naruto faced the female Anbu and wondered just what was it that she wanted to talk to him about. He tried to resist the urge to look her over, as she was only wearing a large white t-shirt that was 2 sizes too large for her and served as her makeshift nightgown for the night, while was wearing his black shirt and boxers. Even with the oversized shirt covering her, the light of the lamp in the shelter, mixed with the moonlight, allowed him a good view through it to see her slender and well-proportioned female form. He gulped and looked at Azuki's face, which showed her serious manner to her very quickly. "What is it you want to ask me, Azuki-san?" "Naruto-kun, you've been acting really weird around me for a few days now. Are you all right?" Well, this is your first time being alone with a woman before, am I right?" "Well, yeah. I mean, no offense meant, Azuki-san. It's just, well, Go ahead, Naruto-kun. I promise I won't laugh." "Well, you're really attractive, and I can't, Azuki smiled in spite of herself, since she always wore her mask, and there were few people who saw her face, except Hayate, and to be told that she was attractive from someone like Naruto was quite a nice change, not to mention she knew that the blonde meant it. She then smiled once more, enjoying the sight as Naruto squirmed at her looks on him, and she spoke once more. "Thank you, Naruto-kun. It's nice to be told that. And I have a feeling that ever since you and I have been on this island, you want to do something with me." Naruto blushed bright red and wondered what he should say. He was not as dumb as most people in Konoha would think, but he knew her history and thought that what he felt was wrong, considering that she still loved her deceased loved one. I feel, well, something for you, but I don't want to do it with you." "Why do you say that? You don't like me enough, Naruto-kun." "No, I didn't mean that. It's just because, well, if I do that, then won't I make, well, him mad." "You mean Hayate, Naruto-kun?" And Naruto's slight but serious nod. Azuki sighed. The teen was being goaded by his hormones to imagine things going on between him and her, but he was too kind-hearted to act on them. He was considerate of her feelings in her past, and that was the sign of a good man. Why people still call him a demon was beyond her at this point in time. He was such a kind-hearted soul, and it made her smile a bit at how much he had changed since she had last seen him. She thought it over and spoke to him. "I understand what you are saying, Naruto-kun. I will always keep Hayate close to me for as long as I am alive. But I have moved on. No matter how hard it was for the past 3 years since he died. But I do feel lonely as well, and I know how it feels to be lonely and wishing you could have someone nearby to comfort you. You are here, and I think that we both need to feel comforted and loved, even for a while. But you might not know about it, but I have I know about your secret, Naruto-kun, and I understand your fears. You know about the Kyuubi inside me. I am an Anbusa, I do know about it. But I don't see you as the Kyuubi. You are who you are. Naruto Uzumaki, the most unpredictable ninja in Konoha, and also the one who dreams to be Hokage. Tsunade-sama thinks highly of you and knows that someday you will be Hokage. As she does. Yes. Please Naruto-kun. Just for this night I want to be loved, and I promise to make it up to you someday. With that, Yugo kissed Naruto and did so gently so as to not frighten the young man, and as a few moments passed, Naruto also kissed her back, despite the roaring blushes on both their faces as they did so, and as soon as they broke the kiss, they looked at one another and Naruto gulped as Yugo smiled warmly at him and reached out with remove his clothes. The female Anbu looked and saw the concern and worry in the blonde teen before her, and she couldn't help but smile at that. It was nice to see that his kind-hearted nature was there still despite the passion and lust she saw there. It was endearing to know that he was concerned for her well-being. It made her feel happy to know that, and it made Naruto even more an attractive young man in her eyes. I'm all right, Naruto-kun. It's just been a while since I felt that. I'll be fine. Are you sure? Oh yes, give me a moment or two. Naruto did just that and waited for Azuki, and she kissed him as she got used to feeling this intimate connection once again in her body. The pain and discomfort faded, and soon enough she was filled with the feeling of fullness and a pleasure that she had missed for 3 years. It was addictive to say the least, and she was reveling in it, and then she felt the desire and hunger. A hunger she knew only a man could sat. She gave Naruto a nod and the blonde ninja took that as his cue, and then he began to slowly move out of Azuki's wets. Oh Kami. Naruto never felt anything like this before. It was similar to what Azuki had done before to him on his with her mouth and tongue, but it was different at this very moment, and it was sending shockwaves of pleasure and heat into his body and brain. He felt like he was in heaven and he didn't want to leave. As soon as he was nearly out of Azuki's wet, he pushed back in, and the feelings were exciting to say the least. Azuki moaned her desire and pleasure and reached up to caress Naruto's face, and they shared another hot kiss of pleasure as Naruto slowly began to speed up with his actions and his thrusts into her wet vagina. The two lovers continued with their actions, and the pleasure mounted between the two as Azuki moaned out her pleasure and Naruto shouted out his own pleasure as well. The two kept at it for quite a while as Naruto began to pick up speed and power, making Azuki even more aroused as she held him fiercely, and the two kissed each other deeply as well. The purple-haired female Anbu relished the feel of it all, and she looked at Naruto as he did his best to make it to the point of no return, and she decided that she would have to change position. With a little movement and some position changing, it was now Azuki who was on top of Naruto, and while the blonde ninja was somewhat surprised by the action, he didn't stop it at all as he looked at how utterly Azuki looked at the moment. Covered in her sweat, her breathing a bit labored, her eyes burning with desire, and her body in front of him at this very moment. The purple-haired Anbu smiled as she continued to move her body up and down her lovers, and she was enjoying it utterly as her cries of pleasure indicated. Oh yes. Ah. The two continued with their actions as Naruto touched Azuki's large S and played within the nipples, much to her delight and his own desire, and the blonde was reaching his limit, and so was Azuki, having not done this in 3 years. They continued their actions as Naruto picked up the pace and thrust even faster and deeper into Azuki's wet, and the purple-haired woman moved her body with each of Naruto's thrusts upwards, further adding their respective pleasure. Oh yes. More. Ah. However, they were already reaching the point of no return as their pleasure reached their ultimate level. Thus they both reached their respective climaxes, and the results were very much explosive. Naruto. Azuki-chan. The blonde felt his release floor him like he had been both punched in the gut and hit in the head. But there was no pain at all. It was like he was releasing all of his chakra and was not being harmed by it, as he released his seed right into Azuki's, and Azuki came at the same time, just as she felt the very first jet of Naruto's seed hit her inner walls, further enhancing her orgasm, and that made Naruto's own release memorable. Indeed, as he felt her inner sheath caress his in such a powerful way that he nearly passed out from the pleasure. Azuki moaned as she felt Naruto's release of more of his seed and moaned at the feel of it. thankful that she was not fertile at the moment because it would certainly make things real hard for her to explain to the head of the Anbu if she somehow got pregnant and how hard it would be for both her and Naruto to raise a child at the moment. As soon as Naruto released his last burst of his seed into Azuki's wet, he fell back on the ground utterly exhausted and he felt like he was both tired and refreshed at the very same time. The pleasure that hit him was something he was not going to forget as long as he was still able to take in air and be alive. Azuki moaned as she leaned forward on top of Naruto and sighed as she felt his seed in her womb. She was thankful that she was not fertile at the moment, as having a child as an Anbu was not a rather healthy idea at the moment for her or Naruto being a genin, but she could imagine what it would be like to be a mother someday. She looked at Naruto, who was still awake somewhat and looking at her with awe and affection. Am I too heavy, Naruto-kun? No, you're fine, Azuki-chan. Azuki smiled as she kissed Naruto and held him closer to her as Naruto responded as well by holding her close. The two fell asleep at the moment and in the very same position. Azuki smiled to herself as she slept. This was the first time she felt content to sleep, and this time she was in someone's arms. The next day, Azuki woke up and smiled a bit as memories of what she and Naruto had done, and she turned to see that Naruto had done out and she wondered just where had Naruto gone. She put on her bra and panties and then her clothes as she walked out and then spotted Naruto fishing for their morning food. She smiled as she saw that he was bare of his clothes except his boxers, and she saw him in the buff once more, making her recall the events of last night once again. She watched as Naruto came back with some more fish. And she greeted him with a smile as he walked up to her. Before he could respond or say anything else, she kissed him on the lips, and despite being surprised, the blonde responded with equal fervor, making her smile brightly. As she parted after a minute worth of intense lip lock, she noted that Naruto had brought her a few of the island flowers, some violet flowers, and she smiled as Naruto placed the food down and gave her one of the flowers in question. She smiled and held it as she spoke. My, you're a romantic one, Naruto-kun. Thank you. You're welcome, Azuki-chan. The female Anub kissed Naruto as she decided to go and take a bath before having breakfast, and as she headed off towards the sea, Naruto looked at her as she moved on, whistling slightly to himself as he gazed at her as she sashayed in the way only a woman of confidence would. Hey, you really outdid yourself, lover boy. Who knew a guy like you had that much guts to bed a lady like that? You were watching the whole time. Oh yes, to tell you the truth, Kit, there's not much to do apart from watching records of your dreams when you're not fighting, and this one, I am definitely going to have fun with this memory all night long. This will really tide me over until the next battle. You pervert. Takes one to know one, Kit. I guess those times you did read the old man's novels finally helped you out, huh? I guess you're right at that. Hey, enjoy, Kid, and don't worry, I know how hard it's going to be if you manage to get her pregnant, which was why I took the liberty of using some of my chakra to prevent any pregnancies. I don't think you're ready to have children anyway. I guess. Naruto coughed and went back to work as soon as he was dressed in his normal clothes and decided to take care of gathering some firewood in order to start a fire to cook their breakfast, along with the fuel as well. But as he was doing those things at the moment, Azuki suddenly ran up to him and she was speaking eagerly. There's a ship, Naruto-kun. I saw the sails while I was looking for some shellfish. Naruto was smiling and the two rushed to where they kept the signal fire, and with a quick use of the flints they found they were able to finally get a fire going with a lot of smoke. The two watched eagerly as they looked at the boat that Azuki had spotted earlier. And to their joy, the boat moved ever closer to their direction, and the two held each other's hands as they felt that they were now about to be rescued after many days on the island. But in the back of their minds, neither of them were going to forget what had transpired between them on this island, and as they were greeted by the sight of the crew of the ship, they knew that things between them were going to be rather different from now on. Epilogue. Naruto was currently heading back to his apartment. He was tired but not giving up as he planned to continue his training under Kakashi and Yamato on figuring out how to find Sasuke and Orochimaru, as they had yet to be detected, though he couldn't use the Rasengan that he was now able to combine with his element of wind. So far he had been able to train with not just his team and also with the others, with Hinata, who was still very much close to him as a friend. Of course he didn't tell the others that he was now dating an Anbu. Gods only knew what could happen at that stage. The only ones who knew about that were Kakashi, Jiraiya, and Tsunade so far. As soon as he opened the door to his apartment, he found himself suddenly aware that he was not alone in his home and quickly took out a kunai and moved into his home. Much to his surprise, he found a large takeout box from the Ichiraku ramen shop, and on the table were several large bowls of steaming ramen, all of which were his favorite flavor. He wondered what was going on as he walked closer and saw a note. Dear Naruto-kun, I hope you enjoy the meals I bought for you, but if you're not in the mood for ramen tonight, then that's okay. I have something that's just as good, or better, waiting for you in your bedroom. The Kyuubi container wondered just what was going on around here and decided to put the ramen aside for the moment and find out just who was in his home. He knew that what he was doing was not exactly in his normal range of actions, but he needed to know just who was in his home. As he made his way to his room, he found his room clean and well ordered, and there was indeed someone in his room. It was a person with a cloak and wearing a mask, that he quickly recognized to be the type worn by Anbu, and he was getting even more confused, but he kept the kunai in his hand even though he was not very sure yet about his ability to fight a full-time Anbu, as he knew that despite not being in the field most of the time, Anbu were not to be taken lightly under any case. There's no need for that, Naruto-kun. Naruto looked surprised as he heard none other than Azuki Yugo's voce. And sure enough, the Anbu removed her mask, and sure enough, it was indeed Azuki Yugo, who smiled warmly at her lover. This made Naruto smile back and place away his kunai as he spoke to Azuki. Azuki-chan, what are you doing here? Azuki smiled impishly. As much as she wanted to keep her relationship with Naruto Uzumaki a secret from everyone in Konoha, as she was an Anbu, she was not going to make the mistake of letting time that she and him could use together slip past her, and since there was no need for her to be on patrol, she felt it was time she paid her lover a visit. I wanted to see you, Naruto-kun. Did I catch you at a bad time? Not really, I'm just a little tired from all the training, that's all. Azuki smiled at that in a way that made Naruto blush a bit and wonder just what she was planning. And sure enough, she was planning something as she walked over to him and spoke. That's all right. You might not have wanted to eat the ramen, but I can always put them away and heat them up later for you to eat. And as for you, being tired is not a good thing, and that is a problem. I can fix that for you, Naruto-kun. Azuki removed her robe and Naruto's eyes bugged out as he saw her, without a stitch of clothing on. The look Naruto gave the female Anbu was priceless as she kissed him right on the lips. And as soon as his surprise passed on, Naruto was more than ready to jump in as he kissed Azuki back as they ran their hands on each other as Azuki helped Naruto remove his clothes. The Kyuubi whistled in its cage as it observed the whole thing and made preparations to make sure to record the whole thing. He was going to enjoy this day very much, and at least his container finally gets to enjoy life and the simple pleasures of being with a woman. It was an even better bonus that his container gets to be with an experienced woman. Good luck, Kit. You'll need it.